Which college or university did you attend for your undergraduate degree?
UNC Greensboro.
And what did you major in while you were there?
So I actually double majored in women's and gender studies and English.
What drew you to having a major in women and gender studies?
So when I first got to college, I actually started out in psychology. I was in this huge seminar class. There were like 200 students. And I just remember the professor saying, if you don't go to grad school, you'll never make any money. And at that time, I'm a first generation college student, and so I was really new to understanding how to navigate higher education. And I didn't really have a home in the academy yet, and I didn't have like a support system. And so in hearing that, my first thought was, oh, I don't know that I'm ever going to go to grad school. If I'm not going to make any money, I should at least do what I want. And I was enjoying all of my English classes, and I had taken a women's and gender studies class, and I was like, you know what, I feel comfortable there, but I also feel challenged at the same time. And in switching my majors over to English and women's and gender studies, I actually found that my passion for those subjects outweighed my sort of worries for the future, but it also helped me realize that if I was doing something that I really loved, I could figure out the rest along the way. I felt like at the beginning, I sort of went into college expecting for the university to like put everything on me that was going to eventually shoot me out and help me figure out what I wanted to do. But when I switched and turned and went to women's and gender studies and English instead, I really felt like I was starting to develop the skills that I needed to navigate whatever came next, and to really build my own path as I was walking. The people that I met there felt like home, the professor, the way that I was being challenged in those classes, but also the affirmation that I got that the beliefs that I was bringing into the classroom could be used outside of the classroom as well. All of those things together, it just felt like the right fit, and I knew that I was in the right place at that point.
What made you decide to pursue a master's later on in women and gender studies? And how did having a master's as well as a bachelor's in this shape your career?
So like I said, I was a first generation college student, and at first I felt like I had no idea how to navigate this system. But in doing my bachelor's degree for women's and gender studies, I really started to develop, friendships and what I would call a family, but maybe that's not the right term for it, but a support system for sure. And just felt really close and felt this tight-knit community with my WGS peers and professors. And I was in one of my cross-listed English and women's and gender studies classes, and the professor was teaching some post-colonial literature, and I started arguing with him about something that he was presenting, and not to be combative, but just to like really push for, the way that I was viewing the text that we were reading. And that also just happened to be the same day that our class was being reviewed by the director of graduate studies for women's and gender studies. And I had already had a class with her previously. And so after the class, she came up to me and she was like, you sound like a grad student right now, like the way that you're arguing with your professor. Have you thought about going to grad school? And that sort of snowballed into my journey into going to grad school. At that point, I didn't feel like it was possible, right? Like, first of all, being first generation, like having no one in my family who had done like undergrad before, let alone grad school, I didn't know what all that entailed. I didn't understand, the significance of it. And so really getting connected with the academic community was really important for me. And all the support that I got from my professors and the help that they gave me to get into grad school was really important for me. And so I decided to pursue my master's in women's and gender studies because there was nothing else that I wanted to study that deeply. I just knew that if I was going to spend all that extra time and money studying something, it had to be something that I felt would translate to all aspects of my life, which I feel like women's and gender studies does. And it had to be something that I felt would change something. I always carry with me this idea that having gone to college, it just simply wouldn't have been worth it if I didn't find a way to bring that back into my own community, and to support my family after, and all of those pieces. And I feel like women's and gender studies teaches us to question everything and change the things that need changing. And I know how difficult at times it was, my experience trying to navigate this new world that was like not explained to me at all. And I knew that I wanted to do whatever I could to change that, so that other people who came behind me who were going to pursue this kind of work didn't have to struggle in the way that I struggled. And so for me, it was a combination of feeling really passionate about what I was learning and wanting to dig deeper. But then there was also this practical piece of wanting to take that and use it for a greater good, if that makes sense.
Where are you currently employed?
So I have two jobs. I work part-time for Planned Parenthood. I'm a content development specialist there, and then I also work full-time for the Babcock Foundation. I'm a program associate there. And I feel like I should say in this interview, you don't have to have two jobs because you have a women's and gender studies degree. I just am someone who loves to stay busy.
Yeah.
And both of these positions give me, they fill different like professional development related needs and desires that I have. So
what are your responsibilities in each of these roles, or what does sort of an average or typical day look like in these positions, if there is such a thing as a typical day for you?
Yeah, for sure. So with the Babcock Foundation, I'm sort of a liaison between our grantee partners and the foundation. And so I really help grantees and potential grantees walk through every part of the process. And part of that also includes like basic admin responsibilities of event planning, scheduling, traveling, things like that for our team. But then it often also includes programmatic work around, writing blog posts or understanding grantee outcomes, which basically just means when we give grantees money to, complete a project, they write to us afterwards to explain how the project went, what results that they saw, and then I really keep track of that and try to understand how those outcomes change over time, so that we can really understand the impact that we're having in certain places. And then with Planned Parenthood, I largely do graphic design and communications work. And so a typical day there for me looks like getting requests for different materials and creating those materials, managing our social media pages, and things like that. So for instance, we've had a lot of protesters at our health centers in South Carolina, protesting against abortion access. And I just recently created an informational sheet for our staff to hand out that include other healthcare centers in South Carolina, so that if folks want to continue with their pregnancy and they want additional OBGYN care, they can understand what other healthcare centers in the area, what services they provide, what their prices are, and things like that. That way, our patients, when they come in, they get the care that they can have at our health centers, and then they also have a wealth of information to choose from, depending on whatever choice that they feel is best for their health afterwards. And so there's that, and then I've also been recently working on materials to help really advertise the services that we offer to our transgender and gender diverse patients. So just explaining what services we offer, what our costs are, and things like that. So I really see, my one job with the Babcock Foundation as being more corporate at times, I guess. And then my job with Planned Parenthood tends to be much more creative. And so I really like having the mix of both.
And for the Babcock Foundation, what sort of projects are put before you or that you are helping to kind of bring to fruition?
So one project that I worked on was our typical grant cycles. We do 3 per year, but we really try to be responsive grant makers, which means that if there's suddenly a crisis that comes up, we respond to it. And so with the COVID-19 pandemic, what we were seeing and hearing from our grantee partners is that the majority of the Black and Brown communities that we work with were disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And so this included, workers in Georgia who were being forced to work throughout the pandemic, who had no access to protective equipment. A thing that we see a lot is that because the majority of those workers were Latino, and their first and primary language is Spanish, they weren't actually receiving information in Spanish about how to protect themselves and their families. Then you have the added and compounding effects of a lot of times these folks live in multi-generational households, and so quarantining isn't possible. And so they're not getting the information they need. They can't isolate. They're working long hours. They're not giving additional resources that they need. And when they're sick, they're actually not allowed to call out of work. So they don't have these workplace protections. And so as you can understand, there's just this sort of whirlwind of, like a Goliath of social problems that they are pushed up against. But then the narrative that comes out of these companies who are employing them is that the reason that they're getting sicker at faster rates is just because they're dirty. And so it is gut-wrenching and awful. And we knew when we were starting to hear these stories that we had to do something about it. You also have the rise in anti-Asian hate. We serve several Asian-led groups, and one of the things that they were often seeing is that there was a dramatic decline in folks coming to their businesses because they had this prejudiced thought that because they're Asian, they're more susceptible to the virus, or they're the ones who are bringing it here. And so folks were losing income and folks weren't able to feed their families. And we knew that we had to respond to the moment and make sure that we took care of our folks, because they're the folks on the ground who are the most vulnerable and need the most help. And so I helped lead a process of dispersing about $800,000 into these communities across the South. And that was an incredible moment for me, not just because of the fact that the need is so great, but in a very selfish way. When I'm stuck in my house and feeling like very privileged and overwhelmed by the safety that this job affords me, and feeling like there's not much I can do except stay by myself, having that project to work on and put my time into really helped me feel like I was making a difference. But at the end of the day, the most important thing for me is that we were able to get folks some of the resources that they needed to survive the pandemic. So that was a really incredible project that I got to work on.